The kitchen door burst open. Every head turned. A Korean woman in a red dress walked in holding a plate with both hands, her heels clicking sharp against the tile floor. Her eyes swept the kitchen once, dismissive, searching, then landed on Ava. "Who is responsible for this?" she said, lifting the plate. Ava set down her knife slowly and turned around. The rest of the kitchen went completely still. Orders stopped moving. Ava walked toward her calmly. "What seems to be the problem, ma'am?" "I asked who is responsible for this." The woman's voice rose. "This food. This disgusting food that your people put in front of me like I'm supposed to eat it. I can have the dish remade for you. I don't want it remade. I want to speak to whoever runs this place." She looked past Ava entirely, scanning the kitchen like the answer was somewhere behind her. "Get me the manager." "I'm the owner," Ava said. There was a pause. Then the woman laughed. It started low and built into something loud and ugly, echoing off the stainless steel surfaces. "You." She looked Ava up and down slowly, like she was seeing something that didn't make sense. "You own this restaurant?" "I do." "That's not possible." She kept laughing, shaking her head. No, that's funny. That's actually funny." She turned slightly, like she was sharing the joke with someone who wasn't there. "I've been waiting 20 minutes for a table in this city. I end up here, and now you're telling me the owner is..." She stopped. Looked back at Ava. "Okay, fine. Then you can explain to me personally why the food coming out of your kitchen is embarrassing." "I'd be happy to discuss your concern," Ava said. "But not here. Come with me too." "I'm not going anywhere." The woman set the plate down hard on the nearest counter. "I'm standing right here and you're going to listen to me. Do you know what kind of restaurants I eat at? Do you know what kind of food I know? This," she pointed at the plate, "is an insult." Ava looked at the plate. The dish was perfect. She had checked that table's order herself. She looked back at the woman. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset. But I'm going to need you to lower your voice. You're in my kitchen. Your kitchen." She said it slowly, like the words tasted wrong. "Right. Your kitchen." Then her voice rose again, sharper this time. "Do you know who my father is? Do you know who you're talking to right now? I can make one phone call and this building gets inspected so many times you won't be able to serve water without a license." Ava's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to leave." "Excuse me? I'm asking you to leave my kitchen. If you'd like, I'll have my staff walk you back to your table and we can start fresh. But I can't have you in here screaming." The woman stepped closer. "You're asking me to leave?" "Yes. After the food your people served me? The dish you received was made correctly. But regardless, this conversation ends here." Ava gestured toward the door. "Please." Then, the woman reached to her right, picked up a glass vase sitting on the edge of the prep station, a small decorative piece near the window, and dropped it on the floor. The crash was loud. Glass scattered across the tiles. Someone in the kitchen gasped. Ava watched the glass settle on the floor. Then she looked up slowly. "You're paying for that before you leave." The woman stared at her. "I'm sorry. You broke it. You're paying for it." Ava's voice was quiet and completely level. "And then you're leaving." The woman moved to walk past her. Ava stepped into her path, not aggressive, just present, and looked at her directly. "You're not walking out of here without paying for what you broke. Get out of my way." "No." The woman's jaw tightened. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and typed something quickly. Her expression shifted into a slow, satisfied smile. "You have no idea what you just did," she said. Ava said nothing. The woman smoothed her dress, turned, and pushed through the kitchen door. Ava followed her out into the dining area, where conversations had quieted and heads were turning. The woman walked to her table, sat down, crossed her legs, and watched the entrance with a small smile on her face. Ava stood near the host station. One of her waitstaff leaned in quietly. "Should I call security?" "Not yet." 2 minutes passed. Then the front doors opened. A man walked in flanked by 2 men, both large, both silent. But the attention wasn't on them. It was on him. His eyes moved through the restaurant quickly until they found the woman at the table. He started walking toward her. Then he stopped. His eyes had moved past her and landed somewhere else. Ava stood near the host station, arms folded, watching the room. She hadn't looked his way yet. When she did, when their eyes finally met across the restaurant floor, she went completely still. He stared at her. "Ava?" He just called her name. And then he froze. No one in that room understood why a man like him would stop like that. Or why even the woman sitting there suddenly went silent. So what exactly just happened between them? If this is your first time here, subscribe, because the story is just getting started. Now let's find out. He stared at her. Then Ava. The woman looked between them, her smile fading. You know her? He didn't answer. He didn't look at the woman at the table. He walked forward slowly, his eyes staying on Ava, and stopped a few feet in front of her. The restaurant was absolutely silent. Ava, he said again. Not a question this time. She found her voice. Hyunwoo. Young Hyunwoo. She hadn't said that name in years. Hadn't expected to say it again standing in the middle of her own restaurant with glass still on her kitchen floor and 100 customers watching. He looked at her like he was putting something together. Then he looked past her at the restaurant itself, at the walls and the warm lighting and the quiet elegance she had built, and something moved across his expression. This is yours. Yes. Then the faintest smile. You really did it. Behind him, the woman at the table stood up. Hyunwoo, are you going to ask what happened or not? He turned then, not toward her but past her, and said in Korean, completely calm, wait for me in the car. The woman blinked. What? The car. He looked at her once. Now. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. She gathered herself, lifted her chin, and walked out with her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Every eye in the room followed her. The doors closed behind her. Ava exhaled slowly. Hyunwoo turned back to her. I apologize for the disruption. You don't need to apologize for her. I do. He said it quietly but firmly. She came here because of me. Ava looked at him for a moment, then gestured to a table near the back, away from the dining room. Come sit for a minute. He followed her. They sat across from each other. He hadn't changed dramatically, older, sharper maybe, the kind of man who had lived through things that didn't show on the surface, but had settled somewhere behind the eyes. She watched him glance at the restaurant again. How long have you had this place? He asked. For years. You were always going to do this, he said. Not with surprise. With something that sounded like certainty. You remember that? He looked at her. You used to plan menus instead of studying for finals. She laughed. Surprised herself doing it. I passed every final. I know you did. Something shifted in his expression. Softer, briefly. You were the only person I ever met who could do both. The air between them settled into something easier then, warmer than it had any right to be after this many years and this kind of meeting. She slid her business card across the table. I won't keep you. He picked it up, looked at it for a moment. Maybe we can catch up properly another time. Maybe. He stood. She walked him to the door. He paused once before stepping out, looked back at the restaurant, then at her. He left. Outside, in the car, the woman was seething. Hyunwoo sat beside her and looked straight ahead. Who is she? He said nothing. You looked at her like, please. His voice was quiet and completely final. I don't have the energy tonight. She turned away. But her jaw was tight and her mind was already moving. The next evening, Ava was reorganizing the reservation schedule when the front door opened. She looked up. Hyunwoo stood at the entrance. Alone. She raised an eyebrow. You don't seem like a man who passes through the same neighborhood twice by accident. He looked caught for exactly half a second. I had a meeting nearby. At 6:15 on a Tuesday. Yes. She smiled. Follow me. She took him to the VIP section herself, which she never did for customers. She told herself it was because he wasn't really a customer. She wasn't entirely sure that was the full reason. They talked for almost 2 hours. It came back quickly, the rhythm of it, the ease of it, the specific way they had always moved in conversation where neither of them needed to explain themselves completely because the other one had already guessed. What does the great Mafia boss eat? She asked, pulling out her notepad like she was taking a real order. He looked up. Iced vanilla coffee. Extra cinnamon. Ava's pen stopped moving. She looked at him. He held her gaze without flinching, the corner of his mouth barely lifting. That was my drink, she said. I know. From 10 years ago. 9. You started ordering it in the second year. She put the notepad away slowly. You remember that? I remember more things than you'd expect. She went to make it herself. When she came back and set it in front of him, he was watching her in that particular quiet way he'd had even in college, not obvious, not dramatic, just present. Like he had all the time in the world and no intention of wasting a second of it. "You really followed me here," she said. Not accusing. Observing. "I came for the coffee," he said. Sure. They kept meeting. There was no agreement made, no conversation about it. He simply appeared, sometimes in the evening after service, sometimes late, always alone. His bodyguards waited outside. He sat in the same corner of the VIP section, and she brought herself to the table when the kitchen was settled and they talked. One night he arrived with a long cut along his right hand, wrapped loosely, not properly cleaned. Ava noticed it before he even sat down. "What happened to your hand?" "Work." She went to the back, came out with a first aid kit, and sat across from him without asking permission. She unwrapped the cloth. He let her. She worked quietly cleaning it, applying pressure, bandaging it properly. He watched her in silence. "You always did this," he said eventually. She didn't look up. "Did what?" "Just took care of things. Without making it something big." She tied off the bandage and looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Or maybe she had, once, a long time ago, and had told herself she was imagining it. She let go of his hand slowly. "Don't let it get infected," she said. "I won't." Neither of them moved for a moment. His younger sister, Hyunja, noticed the change in him first. She had always been able to read him better than anyone, the way younger siblings sometimes could, with an instinct that bypassed all the walls. One morning, she sat across from him at breakfast and watched him read something on his phone and almost smile. She leaned forward. "Who's making you look like that?" He looked up. "Like what?" "Like a person." She tilted her head. "It's the restaurant owner, isn't it? The one you mentioned." He set his phone down. "I didn't mention her." "You said, there's a restaurant I've been going to 6 times in the last 2 weeks. That's mentioning." He went back to his coffee. "I like her already," Hyunja said. He didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either, which told her everything she needed to know. Yoo Seo-yeon was not patient by nature, and she was not a woman who accepted being ignored. She watched Hyun-woo's schedule shift. She noticed the evenings that went unaccounted for. She asked her own people quietly, and her own people found answers. She confronted him in his office, closed the door behind her, stood in front of his desk, and said, "How exactly do you know Ava?" "She was my classmate. In America." "Just a classmate." "Yes." "Then why have you been to her restaurant 4 times this week?" He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a matter worth being concerned about." "What?" "That you had someone watching me." His voice didn't rise. It lowered. "That is the thing in this room that is a problem, Seo-yeon." She stepped forward. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend. Don't disrespect me again." He said it quietly, but the temperature of the room dropped. "We're done with this conversation." She left. But what she carried out of the room wasn't shame. It was something harder. Something that had decided on a direction. That night, Ava cooked for him. Not as a restaurant owner cooking for a customer. She sent the staff home at close, stayed in the kitchen herself, and made food she knew, the kind of food that had nothing to do with a menu. Simple. Real. The kind of meal that couldn't be ordered. She set it on the table in the empty restaurant and called him. He arrived in 20 minutes. He sat down. She sat across from him. No staff. No background noise. Just them and the food and the quiet of the restaurant after dark. "No business talk tonight," she said. He looked at her. "Just eat." He ate. She watched him slowly let something go, whatever had been sitting on his shoulders, and she saw it happen, the exact moment, the way his posture changed slightly and his jaw unclenched, and he just became a person at a table having dinner. Later, they were talking about nothing in particular, an old professor who used to fall asleep during his own lectures, and they were both laughing, genuinely, in that unguarded way, and then slowly the laughter settled and the restaurant went quiet again. He looked at the table. "I liked you," he said. Ava stopped. "Back then." He kept his eyes down for a moment. "In school. I wanted to say something, but there was always someone around you. That guy who used to come by the library." She stared at him. Then she started laughing. He looked up. "What?" "He was disturbing me." She laughed harder. "He wouldn't leave me alone." I used to hide in the architecture section hoping he wouldn't find me. Hyunwoo went very still. You didn't like him? I could not stand him. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Disbelief. Then something else. Ava. Yes. I lost years over a man who was bothering you in a library. She pressed her lips together, trying not to laugh again. Apparently. He shook his head slowly. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and something that had been contained for a very long time let itself go. I liked you too, she said quietly. The silence that followed was full. Not empty, the other kind. The kind that carries weight. His hand moved across the table. She didn't pull hers away. When he kissed her, it was slow. Careful. Like he wanted to make sure it was real. Outside the restaurant, in a dark car parked down the street, a camera shutter clicked. Seo-yeon received the photos before midnight. She sat in her car and looked at them for a long time. Then she drove to his mother's house. Hyunwoo's mother, young Myung-suk, received her in the sitting room. She was elegant and precise, a woman who had spent decades navigating family politics with the calm of someone who had seen most things. She listened while Seo-yeon laid the photographs on the table between them and told her version of events. The restaurant. The humiliation. The seduction. How this woman had gotten her hooks into Hyunwoo over a shared history he was too sentimental to see clearly. Myung-suk looked at the photographs. Then she looked at Seo-yeon. Her expression gave nothing away. When Hyunwoo walked into the house the next afternoon, his mother was already standing in the hall. We need to talk, she said. He followed her to the sitting room. The photographs were still on the table. He stood over them and said nothing. You're embarrassing this family, she said quietly. You understand that this is not how we conduct ourselves. Something in him, something that had been controlled and patient and appropriate for years, came loose. I never wanted this arrangement. His voice was still low, but it had lost its evenness. Not once. Not from the beginning. You sat me down and told me this was how it would be, and I didn't fight it because I respected this family. But I'm done pretending. His mother looked at him. Hyunwoo. She had someone following me. He held up the photographs. She did this. Ava and I knew each other before any of this. That's real. That's mine. And I'm not giving it up. He left before she could answer. He drove straight to his security team and had them trace the photographs to their source. It took 3 hours. When he had confirmation, he went directly to Seo-yeon. She opened the door of her apartment with a composed expression that broke slightly when she saw his face. How dare you follow me, he said. I needed to know. You had men tracking my movements. You photographed a private moment and took it to my mother. He stepped forward. Do you understand what you've done? She lifted her chin. I was protecting what's mine. He looked at her steadily. Nothing between us has ever been yours. He let that land. I'm in love with Ava. This arrangement is finished. She flinched. Tears came quickly, and then underneath the tears, something colder. He left. That week, Ava stayed at the restaurant late to finish the end-of-month accounts. The staff had gone home. The street outside was quiet. She was locking the back entrance when she noticed them. 3 men, standing near the alley adjacent to the building. One of them looked directly at her. She went back inside and locked the door. She moved to the front, looked through the glass, and saw a 4th man across the street. She reached for her phone. Before she could dial, lights flooded the front of the restaurant. Black vehicles pulled to the curb. Doors opened. Hyunwoo stepped out first, and she could see from inside, through the glass, the set of his jaw. By the time she got to the front door and opened it, his men had already moved. She didn't watch what happened in the alley. She kept her eyes on him. He walked to her, looked at her carefully, the way he always did before he said anything. Are you all right? Yes, she was. She had been afraid, briefly, but she was steady now. You didn't have to come. Yes, he said quietly. I did. After the men were gone and the restaurant became quiet again, Ava walked back into the kitchen alone. She started cleaning automatically even though everything was already clean. Then she reached for a glass near the sink and noticed her hand shaking. She froze. For the first time that night, the fear finally caught up to her. The kitchen door opened softly behind her. I'm fine, she said immediately. Hyunwoo looked at her hand still gripping the counter. Ava. She let out a quiet breath. 3 men were waiting outside my restaurant, Hyunwoo. His expression changed instantly. She looked at him for a moment, softer now, less guarded. I know how to handle difficult people, she said quietly. But this world of yours, she shook her head slightly. I don't know. He stepped closer slowly. You should never have been dragged into it. But I was. Then he reached for her hand carefully. I can handle my world, he said softly. What I can't handle is something happening to you because of me. Ava looked at him for a moment, then finally let herself lean into him. And for the first time that night, she stopped pretending she wasn't scared. Later that week, his property manager brought him a contract. Sir, the building adjacent to Ava's restaurant has come on the market. The current owner is accepting offers. I wasn't sure if. Buy it, he said, without looking up from his desk. The manager paused. The whole building? All of it. What do you intend to do with it? He looked up then. Nothing. He went back to his papers. That's the point. When the story eventually reached his inner circle, that he had purchased a building simply to sit empty beside her restaurant as a buffer, nobody laughed. They understood what it meant. They had watched this man for years, and they understood that this was the fullest expression of how he operated, quietly, completely, without ceremony. Seo-yeon's final move came the following week. He never told Ava the details, only that it had been handled, that it had involved intimidation and manipulation that reached beyond him into territory that exposed her fully. When his mother heard the details, she sat for a long time without speaking. Then she said, I see. And that was enough. Hyunwoo called Ava the day after the family situation had settled. I want you to meet my family. A pause on her end. Properly, he said. Dinner. At the house. Hyunwoo. They're expecting you Friday. She came on Friday in a simple black dress with her hair back, and Hyunwoo met her at the door. He looked at her for a moment before opening it wider. His father, young Taemin, was reserved and observant. His mother stood in the sitting room looking exactly as composed as Ava expected. Hyunja was already smiling before Ava finished introducing herself. Dinner was polite and slightly tense in the way family dinners always were when something important was being decided beneath the surface. Ava answered questions carefully. She didn't oversell herself. She simply was herself, which had always been enough. Then his father said, What was your father's name? Ava told him. Taemin set down his chopsticks slowly. Thomas Freeman, he said. From Atlanta? Ava looked at him. Yes. Something moved through the old man's face, recognition, and then behind it, something more complicated. He leaned back in his chair. I knew your father. We worked together briefly in New York, must have been, he thought, 26, 27 years ago. Before I came back to Seoul. Ava was quiet. He was a good man, Taemin said. Honest. The kind of man who was the same in private as in public. He looked at her carefully. Is he well? He passed, Ava said. 8 years ago. The table went very still. Taemin nodded slowly. He didn't offer the quick condolences that felt like noise. He just nodded, receiving it with the same weight it deserved. Across the table, Myung-suk looked at Ava with an expression that had changed. It had lost the controlled distance it had carried all evening and become something closer to recognition. Like she was seeing Ava for the first time, not as a complication in her son's life, but as a person connected to something real. After dinner, Ava stood in the garden and waited for Hyunwoo to come outside. The air was cool. She could still hear Hyunja laughing at something inside. He came and stood beside her. I don't think that went well, she said. My father told me 3 good things about you before you were out of the room, he said. She looked at him. Your mother will come around. He said it with certainty, not as comfort. Like he was stating a fact he had already confirmed. Give her time. She looked at the garden. I didn't know your father knew mine. Neither did I. He was quiet for a moment. I think that means something. She didn't answer. But she leaned into him slightly, just an inch, and he put his arm around her, and they stood there without needing to make it more than it was. 3 weeks later, the restaurant was closed on a Monday. Ava had given the staff the day off. She was in the kitchen by herself doing prep work she'd been putting off, the kind of detail work she actually enjoyed, the quiet of a kitchen when there was no pressure. She had music on and her sleeves rolled up and flour on one forearm. She heard the front door. She almost called out that they were closed, but something made her put down the bowl and walk out. The dining room was lit. Candles on every table. Flowers, not dramatic, not overwhelming, the specific quiet kind she would have chosen herself. Soft music she recognized, something they'd talked about once. Hyunwoo stood in the middle of the room. He was wearing the same dark coat he'd had the first night he walked back into her life. He looked different. Still composed but nervous. She stood in the kitchen doorway with flour on her arm and her hair half up, and she looked at him and for a moment couldn't speak. I knew I was in trouble the second time I came back here. She walked into the room slowly. I knew in college I had made a mistake. I kept telling myself I had time. He watched her come closer. I told myself that for 9 years and I didn't have time. I wasted it. She stopped in front of him. I'm not wasting any more of it. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a ring. Simple. Exactly right. Ava. She looked at the ring in his hand. I already lost my chance with you once, he said quietly. I'm never losing it again. She looked up at his face. He was watching her with everything he had, all the patience and stillness and quiet intensity of a man who had decided completely. She said yes. He exhaled. And for the first time since she had known him, since college, since the restaurant, since all the years between, she watched the tension leave his body entirely. He put the ring on her finger and held her hand for a moment and looked at it. Then he looked up at her. She laughed, and he smiled, and the restaurant stood around them warm and still. In the weeks that followed, Hyunja cried twice during wedding preparation meetings and pretended both times it was allergies. The restaurant staff stood in a group in the kitchen and cheered when Ava told them. Taemin called Hyunwoo and told him he had made the right choice, and then cleared his throat and changed the subject quickly. Myung-suk came to the restaurant on a Tuesday and sat at the corner table and asked Ava, quietly, to tell her about her father. They talked for 2 hours. Before she left, Myung-suk stood and held Ava's hands briefly in both of her own. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. The wedding was on a Saturday in spring. The restaurant was closed. The venue was low and elegant, nothing loud, nothing trying too hard. Flowers everywhere. People who mattered. Ava walked in alone, the way she had wanted to, steady and unhurried. At the end of the room, Hyunwoo stood completely still and watched her come toward him. She had built a restaurant from the ground up in a country that had not always made space for her. She had stood in her kitchen while a stranger screamed at her and hadn't moved an inch. She had loved carefully for years, holding herself in reserve, and now she walked forward into the only room that had ever felt fully like hers. They danced last. After the dinner, after the speeches, after Hyunja had cried for the 3rd time. Slow, just the two of them in the center of the floor while the room watched. He held her like he was never going to have to let go. She rested her head against his chest. And that was the moment everything finally came full circle. What started as humiliation became love, protection, and a second chance neither of them expected. If you watched until the end, I appreciate you. Subscribe, because the next story is already waiting for you. And, trust me, you're not ready for it.